We just saw the skit that Growth Group 2 put on. And it was the skit of the plagues, right? That's what we just saw. Moses had no idea that that's what God was going to call him to do. You'll hear more about Moses this week, but Moses thought he was just going to be a shepherd. Because, frankly, he didn't have a very good speaking voice. And if he was up here preaching right now, you'd all be wondering, what is he doing up here? Because he couldn't speak. He'd stutter. He'd look down. He would, talk really quietly into the mics. He didn't have any of the gifts that he thought would help him to lead the people out of Egypt into freedom. And yet what? God called him. And when God calls you, God gives you the power to do what you need to do. You ever thought you were too shy to meet someone new? Oh, I'm too shy. I don't want to. But if God calls you, God gives you that power. In fact, if you think about the crossing of the Red Sea, when the Egyptians are leaving the Red Sea, leaving to cross the Red Sea, and who the Egyptians are behind them, the Israelites are getting ready to cross, the Egyptians are behind them, and there's this big sea in front of them. And we know what happens, right? Moses parts the Red Sea. That's the story. But if you look at that story, it doesn't happen until they step into the water. They had to step into the water first, and the sea's parted. Meaning that when you get a nudge from God, when you hear that calling, you take a step in the direction of obedience to God, and God's going to give you the power. God's going to give you the power. That's what it means to be powered. We don't wait. Okay, God, well, I know you got something for me to do. I'm going to wait until you give me that power, the skill, the courage, the whatever, and then I'm going to go. It doesn't work that way. You go first. You go first, and God's going to give you that power. That's what God promises. So, I am confident that God is going to do something fantastic in each of your lives this week. I don't know what it is. Why? Because God is creative and energetic and excited and enthusiastic that you're here today, this week. God cares. God is excited that you're here. God wants something to happen in your life. Today's theme is what? Faster than a... More powerful than a... It's about a God who's already equipped you. God who has already equipped you to do something amazing, to make a difference in the world called Asian Camp. My question might be, how do you know that? How do you know that God has already equipped you? I mean, just my word? How do you know that God has already equipped you? One of my favorite verses in the Bible comes from the book of Ephesians. And I shared that this morning with the group, the meditation group. And it says that, for we are God's handiwork, who have already been prepared in advance to do the good works of God, who God prepared in advance for us to do. We are God's handiwork, prepared to do good works that God has already prepared for us in advance. There's a passage in Luke that says, the question is, how do we know God's going to give us what we need? And Jesus says, well, you have parents, and you have friends, and you give to your parents, or your parents give to you, and you give to your friends whatever they ask for, right? I mean, if they ask for, if they're hungry and they don't have any money, you give them money for lunch if you have money, or your parents, they give you what you eat, your clothes. And He said, your parents give you what you need. What? How much more so does God give us what we need? I want to share a story about this. And there's a man named Dick Hoyt. And for those of you at Blaine, you've heard the story, but I wanted to share this again. Dick Hoyt, who was an all-American kind of guy, football player in high school, and he married the cheerleader. Mary was her name. And they got married, and you would think the captain of the football team and the cheerleader, when they got married, they're going to have the perfect American dream family. And they had the first child, 1962. That was even before I was born, yeah. 1962, the first child was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. He was born with severe cerebral palsy. Now, they didn't know what that really was back then. They didn't have as much knowledge as they do now. But the parents decided to take him to a specialist to kind of get him checked out. And they said, you know what, you should just put him in an institution. Because he basically can't function. He had no use of his arms, legs, he couldn't speak. He couldn't barely hold his head up. So yeah, just put him in an institution, then you could raise your family normally. But they made a very brave decision back then, back in the early 1960s, that they would raise him normally. He went on to go to school with other kids and graduate from high school. And during high school, the kids at his school would do fundraisers, runs, on his behalf to raise money because he had to have a special equipment so he could communicate and get around. So on one of these runs, he saw these kids doing this 10K run, and he turned to his dad and he said, you know, Dad, I want to do that. I can't even walk because I want to run. And so his dad, who by then liked to sit on the couch and watch TV and got kind of out of shape, said, okay, well, if you want to run, we'll run. Put him in a little stroller and took him off running. That was the first race of thousands. They've done over 200 marathons. And their best time together was 2 hours and 50 minutes in a marathon with him pushing. They've done dozens of triathlons. You think about this. This dad, in order to not be disqualified, has to carry his son into a dinghy and swim the 2 miles that you start off with the Ironman, pulling his son. Then carry him and put him in on a bike seat and then take off running. And no one can help him because he would be disqualified. And then he would have to take his bike off, take his son off the bike, and put him into a stroller and then take off running for the 26 miles. And he's in his 50s or 60s now, this Dick Hoyt. And they said, my goodness, you finish in times that are better than people who don't have anybody that they're pulling or carrying. You should do this yourself. You would be world class. You would be one of the most elite athletes in the world. And you know what he said? He said, I will never race without my son. Because when my son looked at me after that first race, he told me, Dad, when I race, I don't feel handicapped. I feel power. Can we take a look at this video?